All right, so moving on then into the seventh lecture in Rudolf Steiner's analysis of the Gospel according to John. In this lecture, he talks about the miracle of Christ healing the blind man. And you would think that it would be a fairly straightforward allegory about how a blind person is a person not physically blind, but spiritually blind, and that healing that person means giving them spiritual vision. That would be like the common standard everyday interpretation of this. But Steiner, as always, is a little idiosyncratic, and his reading of this is a little bit different. He talks about how, so he says that the earth itself has an etheric body. Not just every living thing has an etheric body, but the earth has an etheric body, or it wouldn't be able to support living things. So it has to have its own sort of cosmic etheric body in order to support life, and it also has to have its own astral body in order to support animal forms. Animals wouldn't be able to exist on it either if it did not have an astral body. So it has an aura around it, and the aura has a certain color. Now he says, if you were able to look from outer space at the earth, let's say from a far distant region, and you could look at the earth and see it with spiritual clairvoyant vision, and you could see that the aura was a certain color, with regard to the mystery of Golgotha, that is to say the crucifixion of Christ, with that crucifixion, once his blood hit the ground, it would have transubstantiated the earth, and its aura would have changed. And not only would the color appear differently, presumably darker, more spiritually evolved beings have darker auras as they move, let's say, from white to vaguely pink to yellow to gold to blue to purple. That tends to be the spectrum of spiritual evolution. But it would also, it wouldn't just look darker, it would also vibrate at a different frequency. It would be tuned to a higher frequency. So the Christ event actually tunes the earth to a higher vibrational frequency, not just in terms of its physical look of its aura, but also in terms of its actual vibrational frequency, making available new spiritual possibilities, just as presumably the Buddha's event did in an earlier time for different reasons, and made different things possible than what the Christ event did. So he talks about then this episode in the John Gospel where he heals a man who has been blind from birth. Now, a man who has been blind from birth has chosen this karmically before this individual has incarnated. This individual has chosen to be this way, to learn a certain karmic lesson. Those are just the facts of the matter with regard to karma. So he has chosen this. But now Christ, what he does is he takes some mud, some dirt from the ground, and he mixes it with some of his spittle, mixes it, makes a little clay out of it, and then rubs it on the man's eyes. Then the man is able to see. Once he washes his eyes off, now he can see. And he goes back and tells his family that he can see, and everyone is amazed that this man can see now. So this becomes one of Christ's main miracles, vindicating and validating him as a healer, but also getting him into trouble. Guys like this with these kinds of abilities we need to watch out for, because who knows what they're up to. So he becomes suspect, ironically suspect, as a result of this. And then Steiner says, rather surprisingly, he says, now, if you were to perceive a graveyard, if you were to look at a graveyard, what you would see is that the dead, once a person is dead, they become spiritually born. So the spirit leaves the physical body, and it is a birth in the spiritual world. Just as when a physical body is born on the physical plane, it's a birth on the physical plane, but it's a death regarding the spiritual world. So it's vice versa. So if you were to look at a graveyard, you would with clairvoyant vision, you would constantly see this transformational aspect of beings constantly being born into the realm of the spirit. And so an individual, now the smell of the graves would be putrescent. It would be awful. But Steiner says this rather surprising thing that if you were able to expose yourself to that smell, and it would take several lifetimes to do this, you would acquire certain specific powers, which Christ did, that gave to his spittle a healing power. You have to think for a second. You have to stop there and think for a second that Christian art emerged out of the catacombs, and the catacombs were a new burial style. The Jews had always buried their dead in caves. We can go back and think of Abraham buying a cave to bury himself from the Hittites. That goes way, way back. So it's a long-standing practice. But Christian art emerges in the catacombs, and it's not very good. But you have to imagine to yourself, well, what would be the situation of a Christian artist going down into these dank catacombs underneath Rome, underneath the actual streets of Rome? It would stink horribly. So he must have had to put something under his nose to nullify the smell a bit as much as possible, and bring in a torch that hopefully wouldn't go out. And they would get in, do the painting, and get out as quickly as possible. So that I'm sure that has a lot to do, at least partially anyway, with why early Christian art isn't that great. It takes a while to get off the ground. But Steiner says the exposure to this putrescence gives one the ability, gives one healing abilities, but it takes many lifetimes. It's not something that just happens in one lifetime. So this is why Christ then is able to literally heal this blind man. So surprisingly, he doesn't take the typical, what you would think of as the stereotypical response, or let's say interpretation of this, that, well, I was blind to the world, now I can see, meaning I have spiritual vision. I was walking with a materialist worldview, and now I have a spiritual worldview. Sometimes Steiner's interpretations of these things are quite literal, and therefore surprising for a man so esoterically learned in the spiritual traditions. So then he says, so now, with regard to the woman that they bring in, the villagers, I guess, and they say, we caught this woman in adultery, and they give him it's like putting him through a test. What should we do? The scriptures say we should stone her to death. What do you think we should do? And if you've seen the movie The Stoning of Sariah M., which is based on a book that is in turn based on a true actual story of a small village in Iran in the 1970s, where they were still doing this shit. And this woman wasn't even an adulteress. She was just accused of adultery, so it just vaguely traveled through the village as a rumor that she was an adulteress. And the movie unflinchingly shows how horrific it is to stone someone to death. They just beat her to a pulp. Even her family, even her children, throw stones at her. And so this is a practice that goes way, way, way back in the Middle East. I'm sure some of the women were adulteresses and some weren't. The problem with such a practice is, how do you discern village gossip from actual fact? And that's where the gray zone comes in, where maybe this isn't such a good idea. And so Christ says, he among you who is without sin, cast the first stone. Go ahead, which one of you is so innocent that you feel justified in throwing the first stone? And of course they all wander away bit by bit. They all know they're guilty of sin. Everyone is. There's no such thing as an innocent person. So they all walk away. And she's just left alone with him. And he says, okay, I don't condemn you. I don't presume to judge you. Go and change your ways. The fact of the matter is, she's probably not going to. And that's one of the problems when it comes to karma and forgiveness, is the issue of forgiving someone generally gives them permission to do it again, and they probably will. If someone stabs you in the back and you forgive them, they're probably going to do it again, because they think they can get away with it. You're a softie. You're easy. I'm going to do it again. So, and they probably will. However, that's not your concern. That's not your business. The business of karma, the business of your karma in your lifetime is forgiveness. You forgive the other person. You've done your job. You've done your work. So that karmic adjustment will count in your favor. What that person chooses to do with his or her free will, that's their business. That's left up to them. And Steiner says, leave it up to the law of karmic adjustment. The universe balances itself out, and karma will always be redressed. Chances are, if this person has cheated on you, she will be cheated on in a future lifetime, and that's most likely correct. It all comes out in the wash. It's just the way karma works. Okay, so that's this chapter on seventh discussion here. So we're working our way through the John Gospel with Rudolf Steiner.